The year is 235 AD, and the Roman Empire is engaged in war on multiple fronts. In the east, the Sassanid Artaxerxes I threatens Rome's borders in Syria and Mesopotamia. At the same time, Germanic tribes, having caught up to Roman military innovation through arms trade and their service as auxiliaries in the Roman armies, started to pressure the empire's northern borders, crossing the Danube and Rhine rivers. In addition to this perilous situation, the Roman Emperor Severus Alexander has just been murdered alongside his mother in a military uprising, and usurped by a farmer's son from Thracia who goes by the name of Maximian Thrax. This combination of external and internal power struggles was the breeding ground for the continuous civil war and important changes within the empire, known today as the Crisis of the 3rd century. The crisis lasted 50 years, up until 284 AD, during which 70 people would come to call themselves emperors, some more successfully than others. But why? How did 70 emperors rule in such short succession? And more importantly, what were the consequences of this tumultuous time? There were social as well as governmental aspects that facilitated rapid and continuous usurpation. Let us first turn to the social circumstances. It was impossible for the emperor to be present in every war theatre, yet his proximity and oversight would have been direly needed to keep up morale and loyalty among the troops. The rapid succession of leaders intensified this lack of loyalty. Furthermore, the army, constantly fighting amongst itself for or against this and that usurper, lacked solidarity and the self-understanding of one cohesive military unit. In addition, there was no central instance of government that would have had the power to designate a new emperor. The Senate had no say, and Maximinus Thrax did not care for its recognition when taking the throne in 235 AD. Hence, the military was the deciding factor in designating the regent, and it was split into several border armies which acted largely independent of one another. The typical usurpation can be summarized as follows. A hostile barbarian army made its way into Roman territory, oftentimes raiding and pillaging the land they came across. At some point, a Roman army would manage to fend off these armies, and the commanding general, having triumphed over the invaders, would be acclaimed emperor by his troops. Consequently, he would declare war on the current emperor and civil war would ensue. None of the usurpers, however, thought of splitting the empire. The consequence was constant civil war, which weighed heavy on the economy. The cities were the ones most affected by the cost of war, which was heightened by the fact that every usurper, upon his coronation, would pay his troops a monetary tribute. This led to inflation, which only ended with the conclusion of the crisis in the year 284 AD. Another interesting aspect of the crisis are the social changes it brought about, which help illustrate the accelerating character of times of crisis. The Roman Empire had already undergone a development which saw a broader distribution of governmental power among more diverse inhabitants of the empire. In the year 212 AD, Emperor Caracalla introduced the Constitutio Antoniniana, which granted citizenship to all free inhabitants of the realm. Even before that, the increasing diversity in backgrounds of the emperors before 235 AD is remarkable. For example, in the year 193 AD, Septimius Severus climbed the throne as one of the first emperors of African descent. But not only were the geographic origins more diverse, the social background had also become more adjustable. The latter found its culmination with Maximian Thrax, who we already talked about, that had carved his way to regency by climbing the military ladder, becoming the first simple military man to be emperor. The crisis sped up this process. With so many emperors in such a small time frame, their ancestry became irrelevant, and people from all over the empire were lifted into positions of government. Social advancement became more and more accessible. The crisis of the 3rd century also brought about important religious developments, whose consequences are still felt today. In an effort to stabilize the situation, many of the mostly short-lived emperors turned to religious sacrifice, demanding their subjects pay tribute to the gods and find community in their faith. Christianity was in its beginnings and considered heresy in the Roman Empire. When its followers refused to pay this pagan tribute, they were met with persecution by the Roman army. These persecutions were local in the beginning, but in 249 AD, under Emperor Decius, Christians were persecuted all over the empire, from Rome to Carthage and Alexandria. One of the most remarkable religious approaches to stabilization was made by Emperor Aurelian. He established a cult around the Roman god of the sun, Sol Invictus, and in 274 AD he had a grand temple built in Rome to honor Sol. This sun cult is interesting, as it was similar to Christianity in some respects. Firstly, it showed monotheistic tendencies, centering on one god rather than many, and secondly, it had an Oriental origin, just like Christianity. Emperor Constantinius, who would kick off Christianity's ascent to Rome's state religion, was once a follower of Aurelian's sun cult. The crisis ended with Emperor Diocletian's ascent to the throne. He was elected emperor by army officers in 284 AD. After Emperor Carus had died during a campaign in Persia, his younger son Numerian took his place, but was allegedly murdered by his father-in-law called Aper while marching back to the empire. In Aper's stead, Diocletian was elected emperor and killed Aper. He went on to meet Carinus, Carus's eldest son, in battle in the Balkans. Diocletian lost the battle, but Carinus was murdered by his own officers. Diocletian's most prominent legacy lies in the tetrarchy he established. He built a system with 2 equal emperors called Augusti and 2 co-regents called Caesars. All of them were adopted into a newly established emperor dynasty by Diocletian. Others had tried having co-regents before, but Diocletian was the first to make one of them his equal in rank. In addition to a coin reform, this stabilized the situation, and Diocletian would stay in power for 20 more years. After him followed Constantinius and Theodosius, whose reigns were vital in Christianity's rise to popularity. The regencies of Diocletian, Constantinius and the Theodosian dynasty momentarily halted Rome's descent. Yet despite their efforts, the West Roman Empire fell during the 5th century. That's it from me. Thank you for listening and goodbye.